We turn to Douglas Herbert from the International Affairs Desk. First day of school, adding another layer of pressure here.
Another layer of pressure. And, because there's been a whole sort of narrative here, at least among Beijing officials and among Hong Kong executives, hoping that once the school season opened, the universities opened, the students went back to classes, because they're predominantly, this is a young student-based movement, if not all, it would die down. It would fizzle out. So they were sort of banking on the calendar to work in their favor, they being the officials. The students are basically sending a very crystal clear message. School may be starting, but we ain't budging. We want to keep the momentum going. They say learning's important, classroom study's important, but they believe they also have a civic duty to do what they've been doing over the past 13 weeks, which is going out onto the streets. As one of the banners had it, with no future, there's no need to go to class. What does that mean? It means that there's a real sentiment among most of those students out there, if not all of them, that there has been, even if they're too young to remember it, a real erosion of the freedoms, the special freedoms that Hong Kong has enjoyed since the British returned control of this territory to China back in 1997. This one country, two systems looks to them more like one country, one system. It's that Chinese encroachment that they are protesting right now. Now, the education secretary in Hong Kong says that that the classroom isn't a place to make political demands or try to put pressure on the government. Well, the students who are showing up there beg to differ. They say this is they have a duty to do this, and they will continue doing it.
Last week we saw, Doug, that very publicized troop rotation across on the other side, on the mainland. More and more the veneer coming off. It's no longer the protesters versus the Executive Council. It's the protesters versus
China.
Beijing.
Beijing is obviously in control here, and they've made it very clear that they will not tolerate anything that threatens to undermine Chinese sovereignty over Hong Kong. You called it a rotation. There is actually even questions out. There's been some images suggesting that no one actually left the garrison. There's a People's Liberation Army garrison in Hong Kong. We know that. Thousands of soldiers for most of the 20 years since this handover, 20 plus years, they remain very much barracked in there. They do not exit. People didn't really see soldiers go out. So there's a lot of speculation among a lot of these protesters that it wasn't a rotation, it was an actual beefing up of forces there. Plus, we see a stepping up of arrests. As of today, over 1,100 arrests over the 13 weeks of this protest movement since early June. We see the police using increasingly forceful methods, things that you hadn't seen before. Water cannons now being part of the arsenal that the riot police are using. It's now being normalized as a tactic. More and more talk of will Carrie Lam, the Hong Kong chief executive, perhaps even ask the People's Liberation Army at a certain point to help her out in quelling these protests. She has offered dialogue, which the protesters say is not dialogue. It's a mockery of dialogue, because she's not willing to meet any of their demands. So the question now is, her pressure, she's really not the one calling the shots. China is. How long will Hong Kong police be able to actually keep things from spiraling out of control? And if they're perceived by the mainland, Francois, as losing control or not being able to contain or put down these protests, restore law and order, in quotes, does the Chinese army move in? In the past, we said, nah, China's too concerned about tarnishing its global image. It wouldn't do that. It's going to rely on Hong Kong police to do their dirty work. Not so sure anymore. As each day gets by, this is a very authoritarian regime, and Xi Jinping does believe he has a certain sense of righteousness, and he believes that it is his duty and his obligation to suppress protesters that, from their standpoint, are terrorists who are undermining and threatening the sovereignty of China over its own territory.
All right, Douglas Herbert, many thanks for that.